The air above Rensford stirred with the low thunder of rotors. As the papal helicopter descended onto the mist-veiled field beside the churchyard, every head turned. Old men clutched their hats, children squeezed their mothers' hands, and even the skeptical paused, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and awe. The town hadn't seen this many visitors since the flood of '89. But no disaster brought these crowds. It was something far stranger, the return of a man who had once walked these narrow roads in silence, now robed in white and known across the globe as Pope Leo XIV. If this story has you curious already, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life stories you won't believe. He stepped onto the earth like a pilgrim retracing sacred steps. To some it was a miracle, to others a reckoning. Rensford, Pennsylvania, barely a dot on any map, was suddenly the center of a quiet storm. Decades earlier, he'd arrived here as Brother Michael from Pittsburgh. No titles, no procession, just a young man in worn boots, eyes bright with conviction. He'd come to preach, to heal, to serve. He'd succeeded and failed in ways no one fully understood. The village had barely changed. The steeple still leaned a little too far west. The grocery store still had a hand-painted sign, half the bulbs in its open lettering long since dead. People still gathered at Edna's diner every Thursday for liver and onions. But Michael had become Leo, and that difference weighed in every glance cast his way. He walked past the iron gate of St. Telban's Chapel, now silent under creeping ivy. The last time he crossed that threshold, he wasn't wearing robes worth thousands, nor did he bear the papal ring. He'd been barefoot, and in pain. Margaret Hill, 87, leaned on her cane beside the church fence, watching intently. Her voice cracked when she whispered, "He came back." Whether in hope or warning, no one asked. Some welcomed him with open arms. The Bransons brought flowers. Little Sophie Clemens offered him a drawing of the church, but others stayed inside, curtains drawn. Old wounds, it seemed, didn't care for fame. He met their eyes nonetheless, every face, every house. His presence wasn't an announcement, it was a question. Father Edward, the parish priest who'd replaced him, approached with measured steps. "Your Holiness," he said, bowing his head. "Just Michael," Leo replied gently. "At least here." A nervous laugh rippled through those nearby, uncertain whether to weep or smile. Children whispered in circles, wondering if this holy man had ever run down the same dirt path they used to race their bikes. Elders held onto memories that flickered like old film reels, sermons under stars, bonfires behind the chapel, a tragedy they never named aloud. He visited the graveyard before speaking. No cameras followed, only silence. There, under the oak, was a headstone that read simply, "MJ in God's time." He knelt. His hand rested on the stone for a long, still moment. Then he rose, turned to the crowd forming near the chapel steps, and began walking toward them. No speech yet, just a nod, a smile. The kind that carried 1,000 unsaid things. Behind him, the old bell in the chapel tower rang once. No one knew how, it hadn't rung in years. But some swore they saw a bird take flight from the tower's shadow, and suddenly, everything felt different. Long before the robes and the ring, he was Brother Michael, the quiet man who arrived in Rensford during a snowstorm, carrying little more than a Bible and a satchel of second-hand clothes. He hadn't come to be admired. He came because no one else would. The village was different then. The coal plant had just shut down. Families were moving away. Those who stayed did so out of stubborn hope. The church's roof leaked. The pews creaked. But when Michael spoke, people listened. Not because he was loud, but because he saw them, truly saw them. The drunks, the outcasts, the lost. He gave sermons without judgment and walked door to door offering help before offering salvation. He was barely 22. Hannah Grayson was 27 at the time, a nurse fiercely independent and known for her sharp tongue. She called him preacher boy at first, dismissing his idealism as naive. But over time she softened. They'd sit for hours on the chapel steps, debating scripture and the state of the world. Some believed they'd marry. She might have believed it too, until the night he told her he'd taken vows to serve God fully and not just in name. She never spoke of it again, but she never married either. Thomas Delroy, the then mayor, was another story. A proud man, deeply skeptical of outsiders. His son Eli had been struggling with depression, something rarely spoken of in Rensford. Brother Michael took a special interest in the boy. They went on hikes, cleaned the chapel grounds together, talked long into the evenings. Then came the retreat. 3 boys, 1 chaperone, and Michael. They returned after a weekend in the mountains. All but Eli. His disappearance tore the town apart. Accusations flew. Search parties scoured the woods. Michael, though never charged, fell under a heavy cloud of suspicion. He claimed Eli had wandered off at night, that they'd searched, that it was an accident. But Thomas never forgave, nor did others. The sermons continued for a time, but the seats emptied. Eventually, Michael left Rensford quietly without ceremony or farewell. Some said he fled. Others said he'd been forced out. The truth was never fully known. Now, years later, as news of Pope Leo's visit spread, those memories bubbled to the surface. At Edna's diner, people gathered and whispered. "I saw him light candles in the chapel again," said Marcy Clark. "Same way he used to." "He shouldn't have come back," muttered old Will. "Too much pain in that ground." But there were other voices, too. "My brother got clean because of him," said James Proctor. "We were going to bury Billy that year, until Michael showed up." A generation had grown up with only the stories. To them, Pope Leo was a distant figurehead, until now. But their parents remembered Brother Michael, the man who sang out of tune, played soccer with the kids, and once cried openly during a funeral for a stillborn girl. Behind the chapel, the wooden cross he'd carved still stood, its surface cracked with time. It leaned slightly, weathered and forgotten. Few noticed it anymore. But as Leo walked the village path once more, the memories came back in waves. Not all were welcome, but all were real. In homes across Rensford, people waited, not sure if they would forgive or if they even could. The town hall filled faster than anyone expected. Folding chairs scraped across wooden floors, old fans hummed weakly overhead, and the smell of brewed coffee mingled with unease. They hadn't gathered like this in years, not since the fire at the cannery. But tonight wasn't about rebuilding a structure, it was about rebuilding something far less tangible. Pope Leo sat near the front, flanked by 2 priests and a translator who had little to do. He understood every word. The people didn't speak in diplomatic tones. This was not a ceremony, it was reckoning. Thomas Delroy was the first to speak. "We buried an empty box," he said, voice brittle, "and no one ever told me why." No one responded. Not right away. Then came murmurs, a few nods, a couple of stifled sobs. Leo rose slowly. His face was lined, older than his years. His voice, however, had lost none of its calm. "There is pain here I cannot undo," he said. "But I am here to face it." A woman near the back, Marcy Clark, stood. "Then tell us the truth, all of it, about that weekend out." "About Eli." Leo looked at her, not as a pope, but as the man who had once sat on her porch fixing a broken window screen. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked to visit the church basement. It was the oldest part of St. Albans, built before the Civil War. Damp, shadowed, filled with forgotten relics. A rusted filing cabinet, moldy hymn books, and behind them, a locked wooden box. The key no longer existed, but the latch gave way under pressure. Inside, a journal, leather-bound, faded ink, dates scribbled across the top of each page. It was Brother Michael's handwriting. He read parts aloud to Father Edward and Thomas in private. Not everything. Some pages were deeply personal, but enough to cast new light on old shadows. One passage stood out. "Eli is lost, not just in body but in soul. I see the storm in him and I don't know how to quiet it. I failed to keep him safe, and that failure will follow me wherever I go." Another line later. "They want answers I cannot give. If I say I was with him, they will ask why he vanished. If I say I wasn't, they'll ask why I left him alone. Either way, I'm guilty, not of malice, but of not being enough." Thomas read the passage again, then again, and said nothing. That night, Leo walked alone. past the darkened homes, past the diner, the library, the post office shuttered for decades. He stopped at the schoolyard where he'd once organized summer Bible camps, now overgrown. A child's laugh startled him. He turned. A boy stood near the swing set watching, maybe 6 or 7, wide-eyed. His name was Jonah, and his mother stepped out of the shadows soon after. "Sorry," she said. "He didn't mean to scare you." "He didn't," Leo replied. "He reminded me." "Of who?" "A boy I couldn't save." She didn't ask more, just nodded, then walked off with her son in hand. Leo stood there for a while longer, head tilted to the stars. In that moment, he wasn't the Holy Father. He was simply a man haunted by a name that never left his prayers. Sunday came with a quiet that didn't feel like peace. It felt like breath being held. For the first time in decades, the chapel's old doors creaked open to a crowd that stretched beyond its walls. Some stood under the trees. Others leaned on parked trucks, unsure if they believed but unwilling to stay away. Inside, the pews were filled with faces new and familiar. Some came with reverence, some with skepticism, and a few with resentment coiled beneath their collars. Reporters flanked the edges, notebooks ready, but the townspeople barely noticed them. Their eyes were on the man walking slowly up the aisle, white robes trailing behind him. Leo did not ascend the pulpit. He stood on the chapel floor, level with the rest. "When I left this place," he began, "I carried with me more than memories. I carried silence. I let years pass, hoping time would explain what I couldn't. But time does not heal what is buried. It only makes it harder to dig up." He looked toward the old cross at the back wall, where the wood had darkened with age and sorrow. "I was a young man full of answers, until one night I had none. And when Eli disappeared, I folded under that weight. I ran, not from guilt of wrongdoing, but from the terror of not being enough to stop it. I didn't fight for the truth. I didn't demand to stay. I let your grief turn into anger, and I left you alone in it." The room was silent, except for the wind tapping gently on the stained glass. "I am not here today as the Pope," he continued. "That title belongs to Rome. I am here as the man who failed you and still longs to find the words that might hold your pain." He stepped back. No applause, no music, just the quiet ache of truth settling into old cracks. Then a chair scraped. Hannah Grayson rose slowly. Her silver hair framed a face marked by time but fierce with clarity. She walked the aisle with a grace that silenced even the birds outside. Reaching him, she looked up. He was taller now, but somehow still that young man from so long ago. "I loved you once," she said. "Not because you were perfect, because you were trying." Her hand rose, gently touched his shoulder, and something shifted. From the back, Marcy Clark stood next, then James Proctor, then Thomas Delroy. One by one, they moved forward. Not everyone embraced. Some simply nodded, some cried, but not a soul left the building. Near the altar sat a candle, tall and untouched for 40 years. No one could say why it hadn't been lit since the week Eli vanished. Perhaps guilt, perhaps superstition. Father Edward stepped forward now, carrying a match. Leo took it, his hand trembling slightly. He knelt beside the candle, whispered something no one could hear, then lit the wick. The flame danced gently to life, casting a soft glow across the room. And with it, something unspoken was released. Not resolution, not closure, but the beginning of something neither had name nor need for explanation. A chance, perhaps. By Monday morning, something imperceptible had changed. The fog still clung to the hills, the chapel still leaned in its quiet humility, but the village breathed differently, softer. With a weight lifted, not removed but lightened just enough to allow movement again, they began with the roof. Teenagers who had never set foot inside St. Albans volunteered to haul shingles. The retired carpenter, Daniel Frisk, came out of retirement for one more project. By week's end, the stained glass windows were washed, the broken pews mended, and the cracked bell rope spliced anew. No one planned it. It simply happened. The wooden cross behind the chapel, long forgotten, was upright again. It had been sanded, sealed, and re-anchored by Thomas Delroy himself. When asked why, he simply said, I don't want the next boy who walks past to see it broken. Hannah Grayson opened a new community room in the church's lower level, the room for questions, she called it. A circle of chairs, books of every faith. No sermons, no judgments, just space to speak. Children began playing on the chapel lawn again. On his final day in Wrensford, Pope Leo planted a tree, a sapling oak behind the chapel in the exact spot where he once knelt and wept. No plaque, no ceremony, just his hands in the earth the way they had been when he first arrived decades ago. A few feet away, Father Edward stood with a letter. It arrived this morning, he told the villagers who had gathered. Leo smiled. Would you read it? Father Edward unfolded the paper and began. To the people of Wrensford, I came to your village seeking peace. I leave having found something deeper. I found voices I had forgotten, eyes I feared I would never meet again, and a memory restored not by time but by courage. I failed you once by leaving. I hope I honored you this time by returning. The path of faith is not paved with certainty, but with the willingness to keep walking in the dark. You gave me that courage back. I carry your names with me always. Michael. There was no signature, no official seal, just that simple name. When his motorcade pulled away, there were no crowds. Just Hannah, Thomas, Father Edward, and a few others standing quietly by the chapel steps. They didn't wave, they simply watched, grateful, changed, and rooted in a way they hadn't felt in years. Months later, the chapel bulletin carried an announcement. Hannah's community room had welcomed over 60 visitors from nearby towns. Thomas had rejoined the church council, and the village choir, silent for nearly a decade, was preparing a spring concert. One final line was added at the bottom of the bulletin: the candle still burns. And if this powerful story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the next video on your screen to continue the journey with us.